Well, I'm back here on the train on the way home out to Fort Wash. Like my second home now. But I have a very cool thing to talk to you about because I've got Ross Marchand of the Young Voices. Look him up, Young Voices. He is a contributor there, and he'll tell you more about it as well in our interview. But before we do that, a couple of things. Firstly, obviously, some of you may have seen the whole Eat the Babies troll job by, I guess, the Lyndon LaRouche pack. And amazingly enough, there's a Swedish professor who really believes that eating babies will help save the climate. I mean, people, this is how crazy our climate activists are and are becoming and have been. I mean, we had Myron Ebell a while ago saying how debunked every idea and doomsday idea they've had. Now someone trolls AOC with someone in reality saying we should, by quoting someone in reality who says we should eat the babies. It's insane. It's insane what's going on. Second thing is, it's 10-4, and I tried to get you a funny 10-4 cut. I couldn't. But it just reminds me on a Friday like this how no one wants to have fun anymore. No one wants to be funny. It's all seriousness. You can't joke in the midst of all these proceedings. Well, I think you can. And I think you should still have a healthy humor about you, even while we're seeing some dark days in Washington. So those are just a couple thoughts that popped up in my mind. By the way, Yanks doing well so far in Game 1 of the ALDS. You can find my preview on Apple News through Fan Media Network. Of course, follow me on Instagram and Twitter at AlexG in NYC. That's AlexG in NYC. And thanks again to Next Guy Up Podcast for having me on theirs. Just a couple nights ago, it was very cool to preview the whole League Division Series as we saw it, and hopefully we can do it for each round, and I'll have them on to recap each round. We'll work on that and get you some insight from the Next Guy Up podcast, and that's kind of fitting considering the Yankees hashtag is Next Man Up with the Yankee insignia right next to it. Next Man Up. That's how this team is. That's how the Twins are. That's why, as I said, two competing manager of the year candidates across the field from each other. Rocco Baldelli in the Twins, Aaron Boone in the Yankees. But right now, it's a Friday. I want to give you a winning situation for Americans as written by Ross Marchand. And Ross, thanks for joining me. And yeah, Trump battling the media, Trump battling Schiff. I mean, Schiff's doing his own problems, right? But how about the fact that there is a win for the Americans in that there's no longer a stamp tax? Now, reading about this in the Washington Examiner, and a Young Voices contributor, Ross Marchand, wrote about this in the D.C. Examiner. There is no stamp tax now. Is that right, Ross?
And thanks for having me on your show. A USPS, Postal Service, over time has increased the price of stamps. And finally, a federal court said the other day, you know what? No, you cannot continue to do this.
And what's that mean for Americans? You said it's a big win. Why is it a big win for Americans?
There's millions of Americans that rely on snail mail, just taking a letter, right, or sending in their utility bill or whatever, right? They are going to be spending less money to mail those letters. And that amounts, I mean, just if you're taking the total amount of money saved, I mean, we're talking millions of dollars for ordinary Americans. I chalk that up as a huge win. And especially on these postal issues, we do not see big wins that much.
How prevalent is snail mail? I mean, we got email, we got a whole bunch of other ways to talk to each other. But it sounds to me that, the USPS still serves us a purpose, and there are people still doing the whole mailing thing.
Oh, yeah. Millions and millions of Americans still use snail mail. Now, the reason why it sort of gets bad press nowadays, or sort of like gloomy or pessimistic press, is it is sort of on its way out, in that postal revenues from snail mail have dropped, and that's causing the Postal Service a lot of trouble. And that is what is pushing them in the first place and pressuring them to increase those prices. So that, I would argue, that is not the best way forward for the Postal Service, despite all of its financial troubles.
And it's true. And Trump's talked about the financial troubles of the USPS on his Twitter page, and people thought he was kind of crazy, but he really wasn't when he talked about that, was he?
No, he got it absolutely right. I mean, obviously he has a lot of grievances, specifically, when he's talking about Amazon and he's talking about Bezos and all of that stuff. But he is absolutely 120% right that the Postal Service has had more than its fair share of financial problems. And if we don't do anything about those financial problems, that bleeds over to taxpayers and customers.
And of course, all Americans are taxpayers. I want to get to you say grievance. I have a grievance with the way the Democrats are handling our tax dollars. But to just sum this up, so no stamp tax. And in a way, what I was thinking as you're talking about this, a lot of elderly people still use mail. I hate to stereotype, and of course everybody does, but we saw this weekend Antifa blocking like these elderly couple from crossing the street. And in a way, it seems like this tax was like that. They were blocking senior citizens from having their full amount because they had to pay taxes on snail mail. So it's a fair win for everybody.
Oh, yeah, and the Postal Service, they raised their prices from forever stamps from 50 cents to 55 cents at the beginning of the year. Now, that's what we're talking about. So the price of the forever stamp goes down from 55 cents to 50 cents unless the Postal Service somehow wins on some sort of appeal. But that's a huge victory, particularly for older people, because in response to higher stamp prices, I could switch to email, you could switch to email, maybe most people could switch to email, but the older people, they can't do that. I mean, I look at my grandma. She doesn't have an email account set up. So what is she supposed to do? She just has to pay higher prices out of her fixed Social Security check. So it's a huge victory for people like that.
And what was the federal judge's grounds for this? Just out of it sounds like you've been studying this for a long time now at Young Voices.
Sure. It seems like some sort of lack of transparency versus egregiousness. Now, one of the judges noted in the opinion basically said, look, the American Revolution was started from less than this, basically through a stamp tax, right? And talk about like the Boston Tea Party and everything headed south from there. So if that was grounded as too egregious, I don't even know how many years ago that was. My brain is off today. I can't do math. But however many years ago, then this is certainly too egregious. And at the very least, the American people are owed a sense of transparency if their stamp prices are going to be raised. And
you wrote about this in the Washington Examiner. Why? What is your heart? Why was your heart set on writing about this? I mean, there's so many other news things to talk about. Why is this news in your eyes, and why is it worth covering? Because I feel like it certainly is. Any win for America under the circumstances we have today is worth covering, and I'm glad you did.
I mean, look, this goes on two different levels, right? One is I'm a huge postal nerd. I am obsessed with these issues. I've been writing about USPS-related issues for a little bit over 2 years now. So there is that obsession. But what guides that obsession is that these are one of a few handful of sorts of taxes and prices and restrictions that Americans can't really escape from, and in particular, older Americans who don't have access to digital services or email or anything like that. So Americans can't really escape from the Postal Service, and if they want to go their own way, they can't because the Postal Service jealously guards their monopoly on mail. This is very unique in American society in that you have this sort of out-of-control federal agency that Americans can't really escape from.
And it sounds like we're trying to rein that agency, which we pay taxes for, back in, and that's great. Now, let's also rein in, and I'm sure as Young Voices contributor, you're talking about this. Let's rein in the Democrats, can we? I know you're a conservative libertarian, so you might have some somewhat on the libertarian side, maybe more liberal ideas, but overall, I think the Democrats are wasting our tax dollars on 6 committees investigating Trump on absolutely nothing.
You see these impeachment talks, you see a bunch of investigations. Where I want the real investigations to be in is all this government waste. I mean, we have hundreds of billions of dollars a year in improper payments across the federal government. I mean, to me, that's a bigger scandal than anything they're talking about now. let's redirect that focus a little bit to the things that actually matter and the things that people are actually complaining about. When we send people to Washington, we say, what are you going to do about all this fraud and waste and hundreds of billions of dollars in improper payments? And people across the country want their lawmakers to do something about that, not, pursue dead leads and beat a dead horse and all the garbage we've been seeing in the media.
And I feel like that's what it is. In fact, you see the media beating this dead horse every question. It's not healthy for the American psyche, is it?
No. And it's a sense of priority. This is really what I go back to. It's all about priorities. And when people look at Washington, they have a bunch of choice things to say about Washington. Definitely no shortage of curse words and choicey phrases. But I would say that the number one criticism that I have encountered is lack of prioritization. And they could get their priorities back in order by looking at all that waste and overspending that is rampant across the federal government.
And I don't want to get too in the weeds on this, but the impeachment inquiries is that. And why do they deflect? Because it's them. I feel like they're deflecting from that waste by doing all this. Is it because it's them themselves? Is it the swamp themselves that have caused all this? They don't want to look back and say, we should fix ourselves.
Well, it's hard to do the right thing. I think that's the number one sort of overriding concern. Now, lawmakers, they always want to bring home the bacon to their constituents. This used to be a lot more blatant when earmarks were out in the open a few years ago. Now there's a ban on earmarks in theory, but in practice, lawmakers are still bringing home the bacon to their constituents each and every year. So it's very, very difficult to go from that to saying, oh, we're cutting spending, we're doing the right thing, but this may not look as good for me in the short run. People, lawmakers, policymakers, they want to get reelected or they want to get reappointed if they are an unelected bureaucrat.
Now, I got to ask, because I follow it too. Every time you see the House approve a new spending bill, you and I probably cringe just about as much as any other American following this.
Yeah, trillion-dollar deficits are here to stay, unfortunately. And you look across the board, right? And both parties have proposed very egregious spending items, and they really need to get together and say, what can we cut? And the thing that gives me so much agita is it's not for a lack of ideas that they're not pursuing spending reform. There are so many great reports out there. One fantastic report produced, I think, every year by the Heritage Foundation details hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars of actionable recommendations to cut the spending and to start the federal government on a path to reform. But no one listens.
And why don't you think they listen? Just because they're in their own world?
I mean, look, it's very hard to do the right thing, and the right thing is a difficult thing, and it may mean that they're not reelected. It may mean they're not bringing home the bacon to constituents. It is tough, but it is necessary work.
Hey, you write for the Young Voices, and I'm talking with Ross Marchand. What's on your plate? What's on your platter to write about in the near future?
Every week it's something different. I'm working right now probably most closely on FDA reform and really just highlighting the different ways that the FDA, through all their regulations, for example, holding up drug approval, holding up reduced risk, like vaping and IQOS products, how they are increasing pain and suffering for millions of patients and ways that they could reform and streamline their regulatory processes to help improve the lives of millions of patients.
And, the media doesn't want to cover that either, because even Pelosi, to her credit, was like, anybody want to talk about health insurance? Anybody want to talk about USMCA? And they're all like, no, what about this impeachment? So nobody's mindset is on what's really impacting Americans. And I'm glad, Ross, you're there to do that, to put people's track back in the whole, hey, we're Americans, not in my backyard kind of topics here.
We need to focus on everything. We need to focus on FDA reform. We need to focus on postal reform. And I think top-of-the-line spending reforms. And if we could enact even 3 or 4, let's say, significant reforms, we'll save taxpayers a lot of money, and we'll also ensure increased choices for customers. And so that's a win-win situation and a much better alternative than a million different investigations that go nowhere.
Well, I'm hoping those investigations end one way or another and that we can really focus back on. But again, Ross, thanks for joining Keeping It Real today, and have a great rest of the weekend. And we'll see what happens over the weekend. You never know. It's like a different day in Washington every day.
Thanks. Great to be on your show.
All right. Thanks so much. Ross Marchand, Young Voices contributor. We'll definitely have you back. All right. Thank you so much. I'm Alexander Garrett, Keeping It Real this Friday afternoon. Well, actually, Friday night, but nonetheless, thanks, Ross, for joining us. And one more story to end on tonight. Society has come down to needing the help of a certain group that, quite frankly, tends to be looked down upon. A group of nudists had a 55-year-old fire truck, which they used to help firefighters contain the multi-acre brush fire this Wednesday in Tennessee, according to WSMV TV. A fire started in Rutherford County, 1:15 p.m. Wednesday. On her home from work, Nudist Park resident of Rockhaven Lodge, Susan Palmer, says she saw the smoke, called 911, got her neighbors involved, and, hey, got the fire under control in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. So, what the lesson is there is that A, don't judge a book by its cover, no matter how bare he or she is, and in this crazy world, even nudist colonies can pitch in. Quite a story, don't you think? I'm Alexander Garrett. Have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you soon.